June is Pride Month, and naturally I have to do something to commemorate the occasion. Even though by the time I get this out, it's probably near the end of the month, and I'm really sorry. I've just been stuck in a rut. But I am gradually clawing my way out of it, so here we are. Anyway, I'm gonna take these off. For some reason I thought in my head that these were like a rainbow item and they'd fit the theme, but they're not, so... Also, this is surprisingly warm. I'm gonna, like... hang on. Now you can actually tell it's a flag as well. It doesn't have the same effect when it's like wrapped around. Anyway, where was I? Okay, Pride. So, under any other circumstances, there would be parades on, which I miss dearly. I hadn't actually been to any Pride things before 2018, I think. Cork Pride was like my first Pride parade, and it was really good. Obviously, living in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, you rarely encounter other human beings, let alone ones that are gay. So going to Pride for the first time was crazy, cause whoa, other gay people exist. And I got to march in the parade as well, alongside my friend Shola's mom's choir. Hi Kat. They're called Choral Confusion and they're based in Cork, and basically they're like an all-inclusive choir, so no matter what your sexuality or your gender, you can join, and it kind of encourages people to like come together. I remember walking behind them and they were doing like this flag twirling routine, which I've captured by way of Instagram boomerang because I'm a product of my generation. And it was just, it was great. It was, it's really cool to be around people who are like you on such a massive scale for like the first time, and then going every year. It was still amazing. So I really appreciated how I got to go to Pride and not feel out of place because I hadn't been part of something like that before. But obviously this year there are no parades to march in or flags to twirl because of the whole pandemic. But if you want to do something Pride themed, I suggest baking, because I always suggest baking because it's the only thing my brain usually goes to when it comes to activities. So I decided I would make rainbow cookies, which, although they kind of involve quite a few steps, they're a pretty straightforward thing to do. They don't involve anything fancy or complicated. So if you want to try and make rainbow cookies. Ironically, when I decided I would try and make some rainbow cookies, the weather became probably stormier than it has been in a very long time, which is fun because I don't like thunder and lightning at all. But obviously there's some saying about rain and rainbows. The sky is gonna turn grey before it turns gay. Anyway, cookies. So to make rainbow cookies, you're kind of just making normal sugar cookies and dyeing it. So I'm using a sugar cookie recipe from Tasty. Why did I hold it up? This is a handwritten version of it because it was not in grams. But I made these last Christmas and they were good. So I'm gonna use it and make some light adjustments for the situation. First of all, copious amount of butter into the stand mixer. Room temperature as well, gotta be soft. I'm gonna have all the measurements in the description, by the way. I always do, but I never mention it, so I feel like I probably should at least once. I'm gonna just beat the butter by itself first for a bit so it's pliable. Cream cheese, it gives it kind of a slightly savory tanginess. It's very subtle, but it's good. Take my word for it. If, like me, you are in Ireland, you need to use Philadelphia because it is the closest thing I have found to American cream cheese, which is like hard blocks that are much drier than what we're familiar with. I've tried others, but they're all too spreadable. Sugar, I think most people know this, but if a recipe says granulated sugar and you only have caster sugar, that's fine. That's what I'm doing. Cream them together. Now I'm going to scrape that down. Also worth mentioning is you don't need a stand mixer for this. You don't need a stand mixer for most things. The original tasty video did it in a bowl with like an electric hand whisk, so that will work fine. I scraped it down, so I'm gonna beat it a little bit more. Also, my setup is slightly different now. I moved the table out because being crammed in the corner wasn't working for me. I'm still trying to find something where I feel comfortable and the lighting is good and you can see everything, which is difficult because this is kind of a small kitchen. But for now, I'm gonna try this. And because it was a lot of hassle to set up, I'll probably never do this setup again, but who knows. Next is 1 egg and 2 egg yolks. There's a tablecloth, so I can't just crack it the way I normally do. Plate. It's plastic. Oof. Shit. Okay, sorry, tablecloth. Not one-handed, but I'll forgive myself. I'm gonna separate the other 2 eggs now, keep the yolks and the whites, because later on when this is 6 different colors and we're gonna be gluing the layers together a bit, you can use the whites for that. And in go the yolks. And in with the eggs, you also want to add a teaspoon of vanilla, which I usually just measure in the cap because I don't want to have to clean my teaspoon measure. Say 1 capful is about half a teaspoon, so we'll do 2. The recipe also says to add half a teaspoon of almond extract, which I'm not going to do because I think it tastes like Play-Doh. And if you're wondering how I know what Play-Doh tastes like, that's not what this video is about. Don't be nosy. Beat them. Okay, so the batter's now very kind of lumpy, but voluminous as well, which is fine and good and the correct thing. Again, I'm gonna turn it and beat it again a bit more just to make sure it's all even. Actually, one advantage of if you're just using an electric hand whisk is you don't really have to do that so much because you have so much more control, so there are advantages to not using a stand mixer sometimes. Now it is time to get a spoon, actually. Now it is dry ingredient time, which consists of salt, flour, baking powder, and cream of tartar, which the cream of tartar is meant to make it like a snappier cookie, which is good. And if you have cream of tartar to spare, go for it. But if you don't want to have to go out of your way to buy it, because not everyone is going to make things that require it a lot of the time, I think you would be just fine not using it. So, optional. Anyway, I'm going to turn this on low and spoon this in bit by bit like I normally do. Okay, I'm going to scribble it down again and probably just finish mixing by hand because the stand mixer is quite full. I feel like this looks very wet. I feel like maybe it needs more flour, but it could also be because it's so warm in here and the butter is just gone that soft. One of the many disadvantages of making any kind of cookie that's supposed to have a shape in summer is heat is the enemy. So I'm gonna add more flour just in case, but then I'm gonna like immediately put this in the fridge for probably a while, just to be sure. I'm gonna wrap this in cling film and refrigerate it for at least 2 hours just to see if it will change. I don't remember whether or not it was this wet last time I made it, so I'm kind of just hoping this is normal. So it's been more than 2 hours and I have the dough here and it turned out fine, which is great. I went back and looked at the original sugar cookie recipe and the consistency of the dough in that, and I don't think I needed to add the extra flour anyway. But also maybe I did because the cream cheese is not the same as American cream cheese, so it's a little softer, so maybe the extra flour doesn't hurt. I'm gonna put however much flour I think you should probably use in the description. Either way, it is firm and it looks like cookie dough and there should probably be no problems with using it. So now I'm gonna divide it into 6 and I'm gonna dye it with gel food dye. It's a bit stronger than water-based food coloring and it won't water down the dough either. Had I known that the dough was fine and I didn't need to put it in the fridge to check if it turned out okay, I would have dyed it before I put it in the fridge because obviously it'd be softer, it'd be easier to color it. But it shouldn't be too difficult anyway, it'll soften up and then I'll just refrigerate it again. As I work the red dye into the dough, you'll notice two strange things happen. The first is that latex gloves materialize on my hands out of thin air. The second is that the dough isn't getting anywhere near red and is just barely qualifying as orange. This is because the most widely available option for gel food dye in Ireland is Dr. Utker's audaciously named Extra Strong Gel Food Dye. However, I think Dr. Utker should have his medical license revoked because he can barely make decent food dye, let alone perform heart surgery. You'll probably get there if you use a lot for most colours, but red is never easy, so be aware of that. I usually turn to these Wilton icing colours that I got online. A little goes a long way and it may still look orange here, mostly because of the lighting, but with time all colours do deepen. Eventually you should have 6 beautiful colourful balls of cookie dough. See, the thing about rainbow cookies is they're not technically difficult, but they take a lot of time because of the amount of trips in and out of the fridge the dough has to make. Like, apart from what I did just now, later on, after these are rolled out and assembled, it has to be refrigerated again. Then I'm going to cut it into the shapes I want it to be. Then I have to refrigerate it again before I bake it so that the shape holds up. So all the time just comes from having to let it relax in the fridge so often. It's not like it's labor intensive, really. It's just a lot of waiting. So once you've made the dough, dyed it, and then chilled it, the next step is assembly. Basically how the assembly is going to work is I combine all the doughs into one block. I can cut the rainbow cookies out rather than having to like work with 6 separate balls and like take pieces from each and assemble each rainbow one by one. To assemble the cookies, stick down some baking paper on the counter to roll your dough out on top of, and whack it with the rolling pin first to loosen it up. I was hoping I wouldn't have to rely on voiceover here, but my allergies were acting up, as evidenced by me rushing to grab a tissue right here. Roll out the dough into a vaguely rectangular shape. It won't be perfect, of course, but oh, god damn it. Okay, just stick that back down and keep going. Okay, this isn't working. Replace the flimsy masking tape with pink duct tape. It has to be pink or the cookies won't turn out good. When the dough is about the thickness of a bottle cap, trim the edges to make it a neat rectangle. Maybe use a stencil of some kind to achieve this shape. You'll see why later. Put it down on a separate piece of baking paper and move on to the next colour. I actually floured the baking paper a bit for the rest of them because the dough was kind of sticking to it. Brush the previous layer with the egg whites you kept from earlier, or water if you dumped them because you forgot or just can't take instructions. Lightly roll it to make sure that it sticks properly. Do this with all of the layers until you have a brick of beautiful cookie dough. Remember when I said you should probably use a stencil for the size of the rectangles? This is why. Refrigerate the dough for about 2 hours or until it's firm. In terms of cutting out the cookies from the block of dough, I wanted to actually kind of explore a few different options. I wanted to do one that was just kind of straightforward, no further steps, because there's already kind of a few steps in this recipe, I kind of feel. And then a second option that's like marginally more complex, it's like 1 extra step. But I figured I would do it because why not? The first method of cutting the cookies is the simplest one. When the block of dough is solid again, cut it into slices like a small gay loaf of bread. Trim the untidy edges of each slice and cut it into rectangles to make these little pride flags. You'll get a lot of these if you go this route. For the second method, I wanted to make something bigger, so I cut the dough block in half, brushed one half with egg whites, and put the other half on top. I pressed it down and made sure it was nice and secure and sort of pinched the edges together in the middle, and then I refrigerated it for about an hour. I cut it into slices again once it was solid. With a round cookie cutter that I lightly floured, I managed to cut 2 cookies out of each slice. The result is these very pretty double rainbow cookies, which were my favourite of all the versions that I made. Finally, we must address the issue of all the scraps you're left with in doing this. Nothing needs to go to waste, so for method 3 I decided to amalgamate the scraps together in a remotely visually appealing way, and once they were merged I cut out a round cookie again. This will give you these interesting tie-dye-ish collage cookies. And with all of these you should refrigerate them, or better yet freeze them, for at least 30 minutes before you bake them, which you should do at 180 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes. As I've mentioned before, I use the convection oven setting of my microwave for anything that I want the colours to stay bright on, but just know your oven and you should be fine. They'll puff slightly, but for the most part they should hold their shape. Let them cool on the pan for about 5 minutes before you remove them. So the final products are these for the square ones. They're a little bit spread out, but for the most part it still resembles a flag, so You could do different flags this way as well. So if you wanted to do like the trans pride flag, you could just dye the dough blue, pink, and white and stack them in the right order, and you would get kind of the same thing, but for a different flag. So they're a success. Here's the circle ones, which mostly came out kind of egg-shaped instead, which I don't really know why that happened, but it's fine. It's still nice. Still, the layers are very clean and they all show up pretty good. I probably could have used a bit more red in the orange dough, but it's still different. And then one of the scrap ones, which actually turned out more circular than the circle ones did. But I like them. They're kind of artistic and mosaic-like. So as far as I'm concerned, they were all a success, which is good. And they're all very tasty. This is just a really good sugar cookie recipe in general, I think. The tasty one. If you don't want to have to dye a bunch of doughs, you should make it anyway, just because it tastes really good. So that was my rainbow cookie experience. Anyway, that is all. It is 3 a.m. on whatever day today is. The current upload schedule is, if I feel like making something, I will. And I will try and feel like making something as often as possible. Alright, sleep time. Thank you for watching. Good night. Happy Pride.